Her hands were burned for stealing fire until the quiet cowboy lit one just for her. The winter of 1891 came down on the high plains like a punishment. Snow lay heavy across the ground, and the night stretched longer than a body could stand without warmth. Folks in the little settlement of Red Hollow had grown cruel in the cold, as though the freezing wind stripped away the softness left in them. Hunger sharpened their tempers. Fear made them mean. It was in that winter that Clara Hale was caught with a bundle of smouldering kindling hidden beneath her shawl. She hadn't stolen food, nor gold, nor anything a man could trade at the general store. Just fire. A few glowing sticks she'd snatched from the blacksmith's forge in desperation to bring back to the tiny shack where her younger sister lay shivering under a thin quilt. The townsfolk found her before she made it home. They dragged her into the square, faces red from the cold and from their own anger. The preacher said it wasn't just theft, it was sin. A woman taking what was not hers, daring to defy order, and some whispered with lips close to one another's ears that Clara was cursed, born unlucky, carrying misfortune like a shadow. By the time the sun set, her punishment was decided. She was tied to the post outside the blacksmith's, wrists bound tight with coarse rope. A fire was stoked, not to warm her, but to sear the lesson into her flesh. The blacksmith himself, a heavy man with soot in his beard, pressed the heated iron close until the skin of her palms blistered and peeled. Clara did not scream, her jaw locked tight, though tears froze on her cheeks. When it was done, they cut her loose and shoved her into the snow. "Try stealing fire again," someone spat. She cradled her hands against her chest, breath shaking, her whole body racked with pain. Behind her, the townsfolk went back to their homes, to air stoves, their lanterns, leaving her to crawl away beneath a sky dark as iron. That was the last anyone expected to see of her. But Red Hollow wasn't the only place souls wandered that winter. Out beyond the town limits, where the prairie stretched wide and the wind carried no man's law, a cowboy named Luke Mercer was riding the ridgeline. Luke was a quiet man, known more for the silence of his company than for any tale folks could tell. He rode alone, a dappled horse beneath him, a rifle slung across his back, and a past he never spoke of. He carried no brand of allegiance, just the slow, steady rhythm of a man who kept moving, because stopping meant remembering. That night, as the storm thickened, Luke caught sight of a shape in the snow. At first, he thought it a trick of the wind, the way the drifts piled against fence posts and rocks. But when he drew nearer, he saw it was a girl, or rather, a young woman, hunched forward, her arms clutched tight, her face pale as the moonlight. He dismounted. The crunch of his boots broke the silence. Clara lifted her head weakly. Her lips moved, but no words came. Luke crouched beside her and saw the raw red ruin of her palms. He frowned, but asked no questions. Quiet men rarely did. Instead, he shrugged off his coat, a heavy canvas duster lined with wool, and draped it over her shoulders. The wind caught his hat brim, tugging it sideways, but he kept his gaze steady on her. "You'll freeze out here," he said simply. His voice was low, steady, like gravel rolled in the river. She blinked up at him, her eyes glassy with pain. For the first time since they'd dragged her from the square, Clara felt warmth that wasn't meant to harm her. Luke lifted her carefully, mindful of her ruined hands, and settled her against the saddle. He climbed up after, wrapping one arm around her to keep her steady. He didn't ask who she was, or why had she done. He only turned his horse toward the faint light of his campfire in the distance, a small flame struggling against the storm. For Clara, it was the first kindness she'd been shown, in longer than she could remember. And for Luke, though he didn't know it yet, it was the moment his silence began to break. Her hands were burned for stealing fire, until the quiet cowboy lit one just for her. Luke's camp lay in the shelter of a broken bluff, a jagged cut in the earth where the wind softened and the snow did not drift so high. He had chosen it days earlier, scouting the land like a man who never trusted luck. A ring of stones marked the heart of it, with a thin fire that licked upward, stubborn against the storm. By the time he carried Clara down from the saddle, the fire's glow was a blessing. Her weight was feather-light in his arms, but heavy with the limpness of exhaustion. Her head rested against his chest, her breath shallow. When he set her near the flames, she slumped sideways until he propped her against his bedroll. Luke's movements were methodical. He unsaddled his horse, covered the animal with a thick canvas sheet, and checked the ground around the fire as though expecting trouble even here. Only then did he crouch beside Clara again. The firelight showed the ruin of her palms in detail now, angry blisters already darkening, skin cracked and oozing. Luke stared at them a long moment. His jaw tightened. He'd seen wounds before. He'd caused some himself in another life, back when he rode under colors and followed orders instead of his own conscience. But there was something about these burns that twisted his gut. Not from the blood or the sight of flesh, but from the cruelty it took to make them. Clara stirred. Her lips moved. The sound that came was barely a whisper. "Don't. Let them." She swallowed, shivering violently. "Don't let them take me back." Luke shook his head once. "You're safe here." No more words than necessary, but he reached for his canteen, unscrewed the cap and held it to her lips. She drank greedily at first, then coughed, water spilling down her chin. When she leaned back, her eyes met his. Even through the haze of pain, there was suspicion there, a wild animal's mistrust. Luke didn't press her. He dug into his saddlebag and pulled out a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Inside, herbs, dried yarrow, comfrey leaves, strips of clean linen. He crushed the herbs between his fingers, sprinkled them into a small tin cup, and poured water from the kettle into it, letting it steep by the fire. When the steam rose, he soaked the linen and wrung it out. "This'll sting," he said. Clara bit her lip. "It already does." He wrapped her palms gently, layer by layer. Her whole body trembled, but she didn't pull away. When he tied the last knot, she stared at the bandages as though unable to believe someone had covered her wounds instead of tearing them wider. Luke leaned back, resting on his haunches. He poked at the fire with a stick, adding another log. The flames brightened, painting his face in amber light. The silence stretched, broken only by the crackle of wood. Finally, Clara's voice wavered into it. "They said I stole," she whispered. "Said I sinned. All I wanted was enough fire to keep my sister from dying in the cold." Luke's hand stilled on the stick. His eyes lifted, meeting hers across the flames. "She's just 12, Clara went on. "I couldn't bear it, seeing her lips turn blue, hearing her teeth chatter through the night. So I went to the forge." Her shoulders hunched as though the memory pressed them down. "And they caught me. Said fire belonged to the town, that a thief had to be marked." Her bandaged hands trembled in her lap. "They laughed while they did it. Laughed." Her voice broke on the word, and she pressed her face into her arm to stifle the sob that followed. Luke said nothing. He didn't reach across the fire, didn't offer words that would fall hollow. He only tended the flames, letting them burn stronger, steady, as if to prove something. That fire could be given freely, not hoarded or weaponized. After a long while, Clara's crying quieted, and she lowered her arm, her cheeks streaked with tears. Her eyes flickered toward the flames, and then toward Luke. "Why are you helping me?" she asked hoarsely. Luke didn't answer right away. He tossed another stick into the fire, watched the sparks leap upward into the night sky. His hat brim shadowed his face, but when he finally spoke, the words came plain and certain. "Because you needed it." Clara stared at him, as if the simplicity of it were harder to grasp than any complicated promise. In her world, kindness always carried a price. Yet here was this man, silent as stone, building a fire bigger, just so she could warm her bones. She drew her knees to her chest and let the heat seep into her. Slowly, painfully, her shivering eased. Luke pulled his blanket from the bedroll and draped it around her shoulders. He took the colder side of the fire for himself, leaning against his saddle, rifle propped nearby. His eyes stayed on the dark beyond the camp, scanning as though trouble could rise from any shadow. For Clara, the warmth of the fire and the nearness of another heartbeat dulled the edge of her fear. For the first time since the iron had touched her skin, she let her eyes close. She slept. Luke kept watch. The hours dragged slow. Coyotes called far off. The wind shifted through the bluff with a low moan, but the cowboy never moved from his post, boots planted firm, eyes steady. When dawn came, pale light spilling over the plains, Clara stirred beneath the blanket. She blinked at the fire, still glowing. It startled her. Fires always died in the night, yet this one had been fed, tended, kept alive for her. Her gaze lifted across the flames to the quiet man who had sat through the dark without leaving her side. And in that moment, though her hands throbbed and her future seemed as uncertain as the snowstorm's end, Clara felt the first fragile spark of something she had thought burned out of her forever. Hope. Her hands were burned for stealing fire, until the quiet cowboy lit one just for her. The morning after, the sky stretched wide and cold. A pale sun hung low over the horizon, giving no real warmth, but enough light to turn the frost silver on the bluff walls. Luke had been awake for hours. He'd stoked the fire, brewed coffee black as coal, and checked the tracks in the snow. Nothing but his own horse's prints, and a few paw marks of coyotes nosing near. Still, his eyes lingered on the distance, the way a man looks at trouble he knows will come, sooner or later. Clara stirred under the blanket, a groan slipping from her lips as she tried to move her bandaged hands. The pain jolted her fully awake. She sat up, hair tangled, cheeks pale from fever and tears. For a moment she looked disoriented, like a bird that didn't yet realize the cage door had been left open. "You kept it burning," she whispered, staring at the fire. Luke only nodded, handing her a tin cup filled with warm broth he had coaxed from dried meat and a bit of root. She hesitated before taking it. The cloth around her palms made holding anything awkward, so Luke steadied the cup for her. She drank in small, desperate sips. The warmth slid into her belly, and she shivered less. "I thought," her voice cracked, barely louder than the wind. "I thought I'd never see another morning." Luke's gaze stayed on her face, steady but unreadable. "You did." She lowered the empty cup, setting it carefully on the ground. Her eyes lifted to him, studying his features, the hard planes of his cheekbones, the quiet in his grey eyes, the way he seemed built of patience and watchfulness. "You don't even know me," she said. "No." He reached for his saddlebag, pulled out another strip of cloth, clean and folded. "But I know what was done to you." Her throat tightened. She tucked her burned hands beneath the blanket as if to hide them. "I can't stay here," she murmured after a moment. "They'll come looking. They always do. Men like that don't like losing. They always do. Men like that don't like losing their example." Her breath shook. "They'll burn me worse, or worse than that." Luke tied the cloth around his palm, wetting it with herbs the way he had last night. He crouched before her again, waiting. Clara's lips pressed together. She wanted to pull back. Every part of her screamed to retreat, to curl into herself and shield the raw wounds from anyone's touch. But Luke's stillness anchored her, his silence making room for her choice. Slowly, she let him unwrap the old bandages. The blisters had swollen, skin raw and angry. Clara bit down hard to keep from crying out when the cold air touched them. Luke didn't flinch. He worked carefully, soaking the cloth, binding her hands again with slow, even pressure. His fingers were calloused, but his touch was deliberate, almost reverent, as if he was determined not to cause more pain. When he finished, he sat back on his heels. His hat shaded his eyes, but his voice carried a low certainty. "You won't go back." The words hit her like a stone breaking water, her breath caught, hope and disbelief colliding in her chest. "You don't understand," she whispered fiercely. "There's no place for me, not after this. They marked me a thief, a sinner. My own neighbors spat on me before they lit the iron. Even if I ran to another town, they'd know. They'd hear. I'm ruined." Luke's gaze lifted, meeting hers square. For a long moment he didn't say a word. Then he spoke, slow and firm. "Ruined's what they want you to believe, but they don't own the truth of you." Clara stared at him. She wanted to laugh, to weep, to shout at the foolishness of it. Yet his voice carried no false comfort. He said it the way a man said the sky was wide or the earth was hard beneath your boots. Plain fact. Her lips trembled. She looked down, unable to hold his eyes any longer. Luke rose, went to his pack, and pulled out a hunk of bread. He handed it to her without ceremony. She took it, awkward in her bandaged hands, but managed to nibble pieces free with her teeth. The food steadied her. So did the fire. So did the quiet figure of Luke, sitting across from her, drinking his coffee as though it was the most ordinary morning in the world. For a while they said nothing. Finally, Clara broke the silence. "My sister," she whispered. "Her name's Elsie, 12 years old. They'll keep her." Her eyes filled with fear. "She doesn't deserve—" Luke's hand tightened around his coffee tin. His jaw worked. "We'll get her," he said flatly. Clara froze. "We?" He didn't look at her, only into the fire, but his voice held steel. No child should be left in their hands, not after what they've done. The wind rattled through the bluff above them. Clara's heart pounded in her chest. No one had ever spoken like that for her before. No one had ever said "we" in her presence without meaning to drag her down. Tears slipped unbidden down her cheeks. She wiped them clumsily against her sleeve. Luke glanced over, but said nothing of her crying. He simply stirred the fire again, added another log, and let the flames grow brighter. For Clara, the warmth of it burned deep into her bones. Her hands still throbbed, her body still shook with memory and fear. But something else stirred beneath all that pain, a fragile seed, small but alive. It was the first time since the iron touched her skin that she believed, even faintly, that tomorrow might hold something other than suffering. And it was because a quiet cowboy had said two words that no one else dared. "We'll get her." Her hands were burned for stealing fire, until the quiet cowboy lit one just for her. The next day the air was sharper, the sky bruised with low-hanging clouds that promised snow. Luke's horse pawed the froze and ground, restless as if it knew something was coming. Luke knelt by the fire, tightening the leather straps around his saddle. Each movement was clean, efficient, the way a man worked when he'd already decided the road ahead was dangerous but necessary. Clara sat on a fallen log nearby, her bandaged hands folded in her lap. The fire cracked in front of her, but the warmth barely touched the storm inside her chest. "You mean to ride back?" she said softly. It wasn't a question. Luke glanced at her, then back to the saddle. "I do." Her breath trembled out. "If they see you helping me, they'll come for you too." Luke adjusted the cinch and pulled the strap tight. "Maybe." He straightened, dusting snow from his gloves. "But a child alone in that place." He shook his head. "That ain't something I can leave." Clara's throat tightened. Elsie's face swam before her eyes, round-cheeked and innocent. Her sister's laugh echoed faintly, almost drowned out by the memory of screams, the hiss of hot iron. "I can't ask you to risk that." Luke's eyes found hers, steady as a stone. "You didn't ask." The words silenced her. She lowered her gaze to her hands, guilt burning through her chest. The truth was, she was terrified. Terrified of walking back into the town where she'd been dragged before the fire, where neighbors she'd trusted had turned their backs. Terrified of seeing those men again, the ones who laughed while her skin blistered. She wanted to believe Luke's strength was enough, but fear whispered otherwise. "He'll fall too. They'll break him. They'll make you watch." Her voice cracked. "You don't understand what they'll do." Luke crossed to her, crouching down so his eyes met hers. His face was unreadable, calm in a way that steadied her even as tears gathered in her lashes. "I've seen men like that," he said quietly. "I've buried friends because of them. I know what they are. That's why I can't ride away." His words pressed against her heart, painful in their simplicity. Clara looked at him through the blur of tears. "You'll get killed." Luke's jaw tightened. "Then it won't be quiet." She blinked at him, startled. For a moment she saw not just the lonely cowboy who had nursed her wounds, but a man with fire in him, banked deep but fierce when stirred. Something in her shifted. Fear still coiled tight, but alongside it flickered something else, something like trust, or the beginning of it. She drew a breath. "Then I'm going with you." Luke's brows drew together. "Your hands don't matter." She sat straighter, though her body shook. "She's my sister. I won't leave her. Not again." For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Snowflakes drifted down, settling on her hair, his shoulders. The only sound was the horse shifting restlessly and the pop of the fire. At last, Luke nodded. Not with approval or excitement, but with the kind of acceptance that came when a man knew there was no other way forward. "Then we ride together." They left by noon. The trail wound down from the bluff, through narrow gullies where snow lay deep, and into the wide flats, where prairie grass poked brittle and yellow through the frost. Clara rode in front of Luke, seated on the saddle while he steadied her with one arm, reins in his other hand. The motion was steady, rhythmic. The horse's breath steamed in the cold air, plumes of white rising and fading. Clara leaned slightly against Luke's chest, exhausted by the ride already. Every jolt sent fire through her burned palms, though she kept them hidden beneath the blanket he'd wrapped around her. Her voice was low, almost carried away by the wind. "I used to think fire was beautiful. At home, when my father was still alive, he'd keep the hearth burning all winter. We'd sit close, all of us, and I thought it was the safest place in the world." Luke's voice rumbled above her head, steady. "That's what fire's meant to be." Her throat tightened. "Now when I close my eyes, all I see is the iron. All I hear is the hiss when it touched my skin. I can't—" Her voice broke. Luke's arm tightened around her, a wordless answer. His silence said more than comfort ever could. For miles they rode like that, Clara's words spilling in fragments, Luke's quiet presence absorbing them. She told him how the townsfolk had accused her, how no one had listened when she swore she hadn't stolen, how Elsie had screamed and tried to run to her but had been dragged back. Every word reopened wounds deeper than her burns, but speaking them into the open air, into Luke's stillness, was like letting smoke escape from a house too long closed. When she fell silent at last, Luke said only, "We'll take her back. Then you'll have a fire that's yours again." Clara's heart jolted. The words weren't spoken like a promise he might break. They were spoken like fact. She closed her eyes, leaning against him. For the first time in weeks, the thought of fire didn't terrify her. By evening, the faint outline of the town appeared in the distance, dark roofs crouched against the snow, smoke curling from chimneys, the sound of a barking dog carried on the wind. Clara's stomach clenched. Her body went rigid, every nerve screaming danger. Luke felt it. He slowed the horse, his arm firm around her. "You don't have to walk into it yet," he murmured. "We'll wait. Watch. Choose our time." Clara swallowed hard, the taste of fear bitter in her mouth. She nodded, grateful for his steadiness. Together, they turned the horse toward a copse of trees at the edge of town. Snow crunched beneath hooves as the sky darkened and the first lanterns lit in the windows below. As the wind picked up, Luke leaned forward, his voice a low vow meant only for her. "Whatever waits in there, they won't touch you again. Not while I've got breath." Clara shivered, not from cold but from the weight of his words. For the first time since the fire, she believed someone meant them. Her hands were burned for stealing fire, until the quiet cowboy lit one just for her. The woods at the town's edge were despaired with the sound of shifting branches. The snow there was untouched, save for the trail Luke's horse had cut through it. Beneath the trees, they made a cold camp, no fire lit. Luke crouched low, peering through the brush at the glow of lanterns below. Clara sat nearby, wrapped in a blanket, her breath rising in pale clouds. The air was damp, heavy with the smell of wood smoke carried from the houses. Every flicker of light in the town made her chest ache. She knew which window belonged to her sister, She knew which street held the men who had stood against her. Her burned palms throbbed under the bandages. She kept them hidden in her lap, afraid that even the night might see her shame. Luke came back from the brush, lowering himself onto the ground beside her. His face was grim, but his voice was quiet, steady. They still got guards by the square, 2 of them tonight, and I saw smoke from the old storehouse. He paused. That's where they'll keep her. Easier to watch. Clara's breath caught. The image came unbidden. Elsie, shut inside the dark wooden building that used to hold sacks of flour, salt, kerosene lamps. Her sister was afraid of the dark. Always had been. Her voice trembled. If she's in there, she'll be crying. Luke's gaze flicked toward her, sharp but gentle. Then we make sure she don't cry long. For a moment, silence stretched. The woods felt thick with it, every branch sagging with snow. Finally, Clara whispered, "How?" Luke picked up a stick and began drawing in the snow. Lines, marks, the shape of the town as he'd seen it. He tapped one end of the sketch with the stick. Here's the storehouse. There's a back wall, half collapsed, easy to get through, but the square stays lit. Men watch it. If we go straight, they'll see us. Clara leaned forward, staring. Her stomach turned cold at the map scratched into the snow. Luke marked another line. There's a creek bed here, empty now. We use it to come up behind the storehouse, no sound but our steps. He looked at her, voice low. Once we're inside, we move quick. Get her out and gone.